Namaskar and welcome to StudyIQ. I am your friend Rahul Saigaonkar. The agenda for today's discussion can be connected with multiple topics from UPSC syllabus. It is relevant from environment perspective. It can be connected to Indian polity. It can be connected to Indian society because it is very relevant for the tribals. Our discussion today pertains to Forest Conservation Amendment Bill, which has been in news for all the wrong reasons. You can see here, Forest Conservation Bill. 6 out of 31 opposition members from the Joint Parliamentary Committee have filed dissent notes to the amendments that have been proposed. This bill is going to be tabled in the monsoon session, which is going to start very soon. So in this video lecture, we will analyze what is this Forest Conservation Act? Why was it brought? What are the recent amendments that have been proposed and what are the issues connected with it? Is it just this bill or the Forest Conservation Act, or we need many other interventions from the perspective of protection of environment and protection of forests in India? All these things will be discussed in this video. To get to know all this information, stay with me till the very end. Right, let us begin. But before that, there is a small notice for all the UPSC Civil Services aspirants. StudyIQ is offering Prelims to Interview initiative. It is our flagship program where we will be hand-holding you through all the stages of UPSC Civil Services examination, that is Prelims, Mains and Interview. It's a comprehensive and integrated program. If you clear your preliminary examination for 2024, you would be called for a mains residential program. It will be like a Gurukul setup where you will be improving your answer writing along with the inputs from faculties and mentors. This entire program has been priced at a very affordable range, and to get maximum discount, you can always use my code RAHULLIVE whenever you check out. Please remember, the batch is starting from 22nd of July at 6 p.m. Enroll now. I'll see you in the class. Right, let's begin our discussion. As I told you, our discussion is connected to Forest Conservation Amendment Bill. This bill was introduced by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change in March 2023. And after its introduction, it was later transferred to the Joint Parliamentary Committee. And it is seen that the JPC is going to table its report along with this particular bill in the upcoming monsoon session. The session is going to start from 20th July 2023. So we'll wait and watch what exactly happens with this, what kind of debate, deliberation will take place, and we can anticipate some amount of friction between the government and the opposition over this bill. But let's try to understand what exactly is the issue. What are these amendments that are proposed? Now, to understand these amendments, we first need to understand the forest laws in our country. Indian forest laws have a history from the colonial times. One of the initial acts with respect to forest came in 1865, the Indian Forest Act 1865. Later on, different acts, different rules and regulations, they were comprehensively collated, and Indian Forest Act 1927 was brought. Indian Forest Act 1865. Later on, 1878, another amendment had come into it, another act had come, different rules and regulations, they were all clubbed into Indian Forest Act 1927. This still stands. Apart from this, for conservation of forests, we brought Indian Forest Conservation Act 1980. Now, this was from the perspective of stopping deforestation, promoting afforestation. Let's try to understand the intention. As I told you, Indian Forest Act 1865, it was one of the first act by the British where they specified different areas as forest. Any area covered by tree, they designated it as forest. And you do know that the British intention was mainly to collect more and more revenue from people, right? That is why they started to notify these forests. And different rules and regulations did come. And one of the comprehensive acts, it came in 1927, where the government, it brought some efforts to control and manage the forests. Now, the central government and the state government, they got the powers to notify areas as different kind of forests, meaning reserved forest, protected forest and village forest. Even today, if you go to government forest offices, you will see different files wherein forests are categorized into reserve forest, protected forest and village forest. The highest amount of protection is accorded to protection forest, then the village forest, then the reserve forest, and then the village forest. And these have to be notified. This was the basic setup, or this is the basic setup even now. That means the Indian Forest Act 1927 still stands, according to which the notification of forests happens. Now, we do understand that the environmental movement, it got a lot of traction after 1970s. We know about Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, the revolution against DDT. And in 1972, the Stockholm Convention came. After that, we focused on protection of environment, protection of forest. And Indian government eventually brought Forest Conservation Act 1980. Now, if you look at its preamble, or if you look at its objectives, you will see that the objective of this act is to ensure conservation of forests and balancing the ecology. It aims to stop the deforestation. It aims to promote afforestation, preservation of forest along with its flora and fauna. This is one of the important objectives of this. Now, this has to be flora, no issues. Then, discouraging deforestation, of course. Apart from that, stabilizing forest biodiversity, and one of the important objectives is prevention of conversion of forest areas into non-forest areas. That means once the government notifies something as a forest area, then to denotify it as forest or land that can be used for non-forest purposes, then the government permission is required for this. This is one of the important clauses in the act. In fact, if you look at this particular act, it is fairly simple. There are just 5 sections in it. This is the act in totality, the Forest Conservation Act 1980. Short title, then section 2. Section 2A was later on added through amendment after the NGT came, National Green Tribunal. Section 3, 3A, 3B, again through amendments. Amendments happened in 1988. Amendments also happened in 1996. Section 4 and Section 5. Now, what these sections define? See, section 1, it simply deals with its title and the scope. Right? Title is Forest Conservation Act, and the scope before 2019 was such that the Forest Conservation Act, it applied to entire India except for Jammu and Kashmir. But after 2019, it applies to everywhere. We do know that. Now, section 2, it puts restriction on the state governments and other authorities from preventing or making any laws which are connected to this, wherein state governments and other authorities, they cannot make rules and regulations wherein they are trying to divert the land, a forest land, into non-forest land. If they want to do it, they have to take prior permission from the central government. Section 3 simply deals with creation of the advisory committee. An advisory committee would be set up for all the matters which are connected with section 2. Apart from this, section 3A and 3B were later added in 1988 because we came up with policies. Now, you do know that Indian National Forest Policy was first brought in 1952. Later on, we brought a new policy, National Forest Policy 1988. Even now, the same policy runs. After that, we brought certain amendments to it where we defined punishments for breaching Forest Conservation Act, punishment for public, punishment even for government officers and authorities who breach Forest Conservation Act. Section 4, it gives powers to the central government regarding implementation of the entire act. And section 5, it basically repeals the previous ordinance. Through further amendments, as I told you, section 2A was brought, which deals with National Green Tribunal. So a fairly simple kind of act, Forest Conservation Act 1980. The main aim is to stop deforestation, promote afforestation, and ensure that whatever forests have been already notified under the Indian Forest Act 1927, if you notify something as a forest, and then if you want to change it, if you want to denotify it, then I need permission. All right, so that's the basic scope of Forest Conservation Act. I hope you have gotten clarity about this act. Many people think it might be very complicated, but it's fairly simple. Now, apart from these acts, we also have many other rules and regulations, many other acts connected to environmental protection and forest conservation. You do know National Forest Policy 1952. Later on, Forest Policy 1988 came up. In fact, our draft National Forest Policy 2018 is still pending. It is going to be finalized very, very soon. We'll wait and watch for that. Apart from that, we do have Wildlife Protection Act, we have Environmental Protection Act, we have Biodiversity Act. Different acts, they work in congruence. Forest Conservation Act, I would say its prime objective is to stop forest land being converted into non-forest, or to stop the transformation of forest land for the use of non-forest purposes. So that's basically the Forest Conservation Act. Now, apart from this Forest Conservation Act, which is fairly simple, having only 5 sections, there is another Supreme Court judgment which becomes very relevant for us to understand, because we need to understand these amendments. In 1996, in a landmark judgment, Supreme Court expanded the definition of forest in the T.N. Godavarman Judgement. It's a very famous case. I want the UPSC Civil Services aspirants to remember this case as well. T.N. Godavarman versus Union of India case 1996, where the Supreme Court, it basically expanded the definition of forest. Now, as you know, in the Indian Forest Act 1927, forest can be notified as reserved forest, protected forest, village forest. Now, Supreme Court said that forest or the Forest Conservation Act, it would be applicable to any kind of forest, not just the ones which are defined there. It would be applied to any forest, irrespective of its nature or ownership or classification under any of the laws, any of the rules. We must take forest according to the dictionary meaning. In this judgment, the Honorable Supreme Court, it directed the state governments to create district level committees and identify areas as forests irrespective of their ownership. That means even if it is a private forest, even if it is any kind of forest, it would now come under the purview of Forest Conservation Act. Meaning, if now I want to transform that forest land for non-forest purposes, I would require the prior approval from the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. So this judgment basically brought large amount of natural forests which were earlier not recorded by the Forest Division under the purview of Forest Conservation Act. Now, by now, you must be thinking, sir, if this happens, then what would happen to the business development? Say, for example, if I have a small forest in my own private area, I want to convert it into a resort, I want to convert it into a hotel, I want to convert it into some business venture, then also you need to get those prior permissions. That's the meaning of, or that's the ultimate conclusion from the Godavarman judgment, where the definition of forest was expanded. Now, this was in line with the environmental movement, which I said, because we need to focus more and more on forest conservation. So this is the legal setup as of now for us to understand from the perspective of forest conservation. So the next question. Now, what has happened in this amendment bill because of which there is criticism for this? Let's try to understand. The new amendments in the Forest Conservation Bill are something like these. The first change is a new preamble has been brought. I would say on this there would be no issues, or I anticipate no issues on this. The new preamble, it highlights India's commitment to preserving forests, biodiversity and tackling climate change. You do know that we have set up very strong NDCs for ourselves. We have promised at the COP26 the Panchamrit, and we want to tackle climate change. So this is very fine. But there is second thing which is added. The name of the act itself is being amended from Forest Conservation Act. It would be renamed to Van Sanrakshan Evam Samvardhan Adhiniyam. When we translate it into English, it becomes Forest Conservation and Augmentation Act. All right. But the issue here is with the Sanskrit name for many people who have opposed, because the name now would be Van Sanrakshan Evam Samvardhan Adhiniyam. Apart from that, the application of act, the act would only apply to lands notified in any government forest which are recorded as forest on or after 1980. So by now you must have already deciphered that this basically waters down the T.N. Godavarman judgment of the Supreme Court. Apart from that, there are large exemptions which are being brought in the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill. What are the exemptions? As I told you, notified forest land that was legally diverted between 1980 and the date of Godavarman judgment for non-forest use, that would be exempted. Apart from that, forest land which is situated 100 kilometers from any border, 100 kilometers from the international borders, they can be used for strategic projects of national importance. If this is the Indian border, then 100 kilometers from the border, any project, the forest land can be diverted for strategic projects of national importance. Apart from that, land ranging between 5 to 10 hectares of security and defense projects, they can be diverted from forest to non-forest purposes. Along with it, there are some other clauses which have been included. For instance, silviculture project, establishment of a zoo, safari, ecotourism facilities, which are already included in the tiger conservation plan, management plan, they would be exempt. They would be exempt from any prior approval. There is one more clause. Please focus on this. For any other like purposes ordered or specified by the center under this particular act, they would be exempt from any sort of permission. So what are the issues with this? First of all, this is again a speculative discussion. These changes are going to be tabled in the parliament in the monsoon session, and if they are accepted by both the houses, finally president assents it, then it becomes an act. And after it becomes an act, again I would say that we can anticipate this going into judiciary also. Let's wait and watch for that. But what are the issues as of now? The issues are these. First one is that the JPC, which had 31 members, some of the members had highlighted issues with the amendments, and those issues were not taken into consideration. That is the allegation of opposition, that there are no changes which have been suggested by the JPC which were highlighted by the members. I told you there are 6 members who have dissented. 6 out of 31 opposition members, they filed dissent note along with the report, which will be tabled in the parliament very soon. Apart from this, the exemptions near the border areas up to 100 kilometers, it is going to deteriorate especially the fragile Himalayan ecosystem. This has been highlighted by the opposition members as well as many environmental experts. Now if you look at India, I'll just draw a crude diagram here for the boundary. Right now, when you look at our borders, most of the borders along the Himalayan range, they have fragile ecosystems, they have forests, especially even in the northeastern areas, we have plenty of forest, evergreen forest there. And 100 kilometers from the international borders, especially in the northeastern regions, they are now exempt from the Forest Conservation Act, from the purview of forest conservation. Apart from that, some members have highlighted dissent against the Sanskrit name. All right. Some have also highlighted that the Godavarman judgment is bypassed. Why? Because the change here is that notified forest land that was legally diverted between 1980 to 1996, that is now exempt. Then what has happened is already happened. That means it is diversion or dilution of the TN Godavarman judgment, which was given by the Supreme Court. Apart from that, vague terminology has been highlighted. Experts suggest that there are a lot of vague terms which are used in the amendment, like proposed, ecotourism facilities, or any other purposes which are approved by the central government, which are approved or specified by the central government. Now, some even question what is the use of a zoo, because there is already a tiger conservation plan. There are already things which are set up. Then what is the use of zoo? They also highlight that. Apart from that, you have seen that the powers under the Forest Conservation Act are more and more tilted towards the central government. And mind you, forest, it comes under the concurrent list. Forest management, forest conservation, forest itself, it comes under concurrent list. That means center and state both are responsible. And it makes sense also because ultimately we need to follow the principle of subsidiarity from central government to state government. Ultimately, people, I said that tribals who live peacefully with the forest, they would also be one of the major stakeholders under this. So let's wait and watch what exactly happens. But this entire discussion is again connected to this classic conundrum that we have in front of us: how to balance the environmental conservation, the forest conservation, ecological preservation with our industrial development. We do need industrial development, we do need growth, but we need to balance it. That is where the term sustainable comes. And Forest Conservation Act was one of the acts for bringing this sustainable development itself. Right now, there is criticism that it is being diluted. Let's discuss hypothetically. Say the bill is passed, whatever happens, we'll talk about that whenever. That's why it's written, let's wait and watch. Whenever that happens, we'll keep following that. But even if the bill comes, because from 1980 we already have Forest Conservation Act, there are many other problems which are connected with forest conservation in India, which need to be rectified, which are not even in the amendment itself. Some of the issues are that the regulatory agencies that we have right now, they have been understaffed, or they are understaffed. The amount of economic development, the amount of industries that are coming up, in comparison to that, the number of people, the number of inspectors, the number of regulation officers, they are understaffed. Apart from that, there is lack of technical expertise among the personnel who are involved with respect to implementation of these acts itself. I do not have to mention about the rampant corruption that goes on in our country, ever rising levels of corruption. These are a big, big issue. There is a problem of insufficient financial resources as well when it comes to ministries here, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. We in general have social obligations, and because of that we feel the financial crunch forever. Apart from that, there is an issue of centralization, and whenever we talk about forest conservation, there has to be more and more lack of public participation. Without that effective implementation of any rules, regulations which are connected with forest, they would rather be useless itself. We would not see effective implementation. That's why what we need is amendments or improvement in regard to all these things, and not just these amendments. But let's leave that debate apart, and let's wait and watch for what happens with the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill. As and when that happens, we will bring an update to you on StudyIQ. But this is a very important topic for you to understand, because once you get into service, say you get into service, you are posted with the MOE of CC, or if you enter the Indian Forest Service, this debate would be following you always, because you would be on the government side. That means you would have to balance how to preserve our environment, how to preserve our ecosystem, along with it, how to economically develop our nation. All right, so if any update comes, we'll discuss that again. Thank you for watching this video, and if you like this video, you can always follow me on my social media handle @RahulSai222. Thank you for watching this. Jai Hind.